welcome back to Room 237, and I'm back with another Italian Giallo review. But before I get to that, I'm still feeling a little under the weather, not that great, which is why there's kind of been a lack of videos this week. I am feeling better, just not that great, so if I sound off or terrible, that's why. I'm still getting over something. Now, this is the second and last review that I have for Vinegar Syndrome's Forgotten Gialli Volume 4, which just came out this past week. I'd already done Sister of Ursula prior to owning this, and my last review was Killer is Still Among Us, so check out my reviews for those. And so this is the last one for the collection, and it is Arabella Black Angel, which came out in 1989, and this is definitely one that is deserving to be in a Forgotten Gialli box set. Because I've heard people talk about Sister of Ursula and Killer is Still Among Us. I've never heard anybody talk about Arabella Black Angel. I didn't know a thing about this movie at all. I think even in all the Italian film Giallo circles I'm in, like on social media and whatnot, there's like one other Giallo collector here on YouTube that I think has this. So this is definitely one that belongs in a collection like this. There's a few other ones that I could think of that might have been better choices than these two, but at least now they're out on Blu-ray, so I can't complain. But that said, this is not a very good movie. I see why some people would like it if it does have fans. This is definitely, as far as Giallo goes, it's certainly one of the trashier, sleazier ones. Maybe not to the extent of like a Play Motel or, from what I've heard, Giallo in Venice, which I'm hoping to get soon. This is more like the 80s Giallo sleaze, like New York Ripper. I would say it's more like that. Very sleazy. But it also has that touch of like where Giallo was kind of heading, almost where slashers were heading at the time, and what would be big in America in the early to mid 90s, the erotic thriller. It's kind of closer to that as well. I mean, just take a look at that poster. It's definitely 80s, but it has that erotic thriller look to it. Just based on the cover alone, I would think it's one like Nothing Underneath or one of those sequels, which I think there's a third Nothing Underneath. I know there is. I can't remember the name of it, though. Sorry, my nose keeps running. It's terrible. Now, this was actually directed by Stelvio Massi, who did a ton of Polizioteschi films in the 70s. He did direct Five Women for the Killer, which is a Giallo from 74 that I would love to get, that I've heard is really good. Now it stars Tini Cancino, who I believe was a playmate at the time. I could be wrong. But also Francesco Casal. I don't know if he's related to John Casal. I doubt it. My favorite character actor, Fredo from The Godfather. Valentina Visconti and Evelyn Stewart. Which is really, seeing Evelyn Stewart, especially this late for a Giallo entry in 1989, she is able to play an older generation character. She's not the bombshell, one with all the nude scenes like she would be back in the Giallo prime. So it's cool to see her kind of, playing an older character. Like she plays Arabella's mother-in-law, which I'm going to call her Arabella because, one, that's her name. But if you watch the English version, even with the subtitles, both the English audio track and the English subtitles call her Deborah. But even in the credits, she's listed as Arabella. There's no Wikipedia or anything for this, but her husband, Frank, or Francesco, played by Francesco Casal, he was kind of funny. He reminded me of Balky from Perfect Strangers. Just he looks like Balky. I know I could have also said, Toomey from Stephen King's The Langoliers, but he's Balky. See who this was written by. There's a 5.2 on IMDb. Normally I don't use IMDb, but it was written by R. Filippucci. And I already said who stars in it. And, I mean, it has an interesting premise, which is... Oh, and also, the music, it's very 80s. The soft synth I really liked. Especially towards, like, the end, when everything's coming together. It had, like, a Simon Wright era AC/DC type drum beat to it. Like, this very atmospheric kind of pounding drum that I thought was interesting. Now, sorry I'm wiping my nose so much too. Just flu season. I think it's just a head cold. But, so, Arabella, played by Tini Cancino, it opens up with her going to this rundown, graffiti-covered house out in the woods where there's all of these sex people, prostitutes, S&M people. The door greeter is some overweight guy dressed in drag, playing like a little accordion. Looks like someone straight out of a John Waters movie. He's like the door greeter. And she's walking through, and yeah, I think something similar to this outfit, but more with like a jacket. Actually, I don't think she wears this outfit at all. But I don't know how well you can see it, but yeah, she's got like the see-through mesh and then like a jacket. She's got like gold eye makeup and a red wig. She goes from room to room, sees all the different sex activities, picks this one guy, and then there's a cop raid. And this one cop thinks she's a prostitute, so he essentially rapes her over the hood of his car as he's arresting her, but she's a nymphomaniac. Then we find out she has a husband, Frank, who's a popular writer, but he's in a wheelchair. He's got writer's block. And just very distant, angry. And then one day, that same cop shows up, tries to have sex with her again. She doesn't want to, but he starts kissing her. Then she gets in the mood. So they're in like the pool house or the shed, which is like the size of a normal person house, or the garage. And that's when Frank comes out, sees them. She sees that he sees them, so she grabs a hammer, hits the cop, which is essentially the same as like a bonk, kills him. And I think Frank takes it as like, he came on to you, it's okay, don't worry about it. He has the body taken care of, and then he gets this idea for a new book called Black Angel, where he sends her out to meet men, and then these men end up being killed by an unseen person with a pair of scissors. They get stabbed, and their genitals get mutilated. But also, there's these women that are getting killed, much in the same vein, which there's kind of two things going on, and I thought this one was kind of confusing, but I found myself not very invested in it. I thought it was kind of boring. If it has too many of like the sleazy, just nude scenes or sex scenes just for the sake of having those, I find it a tad boring. And this is one that does have a lot of those. But there's also a string of murders where women are also being killed with a pair of scissors, their genitals mutilated. And the inspector, who's played by, her character is Inspector Fowler, and she's, okay, it doesn't show me who's playing her. Oh, Valentina Visconti. Oh, and Evelyn Stewart is Frank's mother. And the killer could be linked to some dark past in the inspector's, you know, a dark secret in the inspector's past. And then it all comes to a head at the end. Basically, I kind of gotta read up on it. The dialogue's kind of silly. Again, I watched the English dub, but like after the cop gets killed, the initial cop, Frank and Arabella are laying in bed together, and she's like, he says, "Oh, he was a blackmailer. People aren't gonna come looking for him," and she says, "Well, he was a police officer. Isn't he going to be missing in action or whatever they call it?" It just sounds silly. But the way Frank is writing his story, which is like scene for scene, word for word, her sexual encounters that he sends her out on, she seems to think that Frank thinks she's the killer. She even starts to think maybe she herself is the killer and is kind of getting a little paranoid. And that's where I was getting kind of confused, because for a while I thought, okay, is the stuff with the inspector, like, is that his story? And we're just kind of seeing it and that's going to be the twist? Because it seems like almost unrelated, or it's not written very well. And also, like, one of the first people to get killed is some private investigator who was at that party sex house in the opening of the film. He's like the first one to get killed, and we see, I don't think we actually see him get his genitals mutilated. I do know that the next guy we do. But also the fact that she's, one, having infidelities seems to turn Frank on, but also the fact that there's these murders surrounding the guys, the guys that she's having these affairs with are being killed. It all seems to turn him on, and he gets more and more excited and wants to have sex with her more as the film goes on. And the more she reads the book, Black Angel, and sees that she's the main character, also the main suspect and everything, she gets more obsessed. I mean, she gets more upset and he gets more obsessed by continuing to make her go out and do these things. And says this for the sake of the book. Also, Inspector Fowler, we see that she has this lesbian relationship with this woman named Agnes, who, this was a pretty cold scene. They're in bed together. Like, she had this nightmare, Fowler did, a pretty stylish nightmare. I'll say that's the most stylish and most interesting shot scene in the whole film, where she's in like this red dress, and it's like she's walking towards the camera, is kind of blowing, and she's yelling at something where there's like a light behind it. I don't know if it's like a building or what it was, or like a stone gate. But then she's killed in the dream. So she wakes up, her girlfriend wakes up, and she starts to tell her this deep, dark secret about her past. Only so the next day, that story could be a front page story that her girlfriend sold. To which she says, and she's very cold about it, like when she says, but that was a secret. She was like, yeah, you said that already. It's like, how could you do that? She's like, because they paid me good money and you're too emotionally invested into this case. So I was hoping they'd take it away from you and give it to me because you just made me your assistant. And even when Fowler says, I thought girls had better souls than men, she's like, typical lesbian thoughts, dear. So she's a cold character, but she gets her comeuppance. We do have some classic Giallo stuff that I enjoyed, like that Agnes lady gets, which Fowler does get the case taken away from her, but Agnes answers the phone, and it's this person like, is this Inspector Fowler? Now, if you've seen enough Giallo with this cast, you know who it is that's doing that voice. She says, yes, it is. The person says they have some information. Let's go meet. Well, Agnes goes to the park to meet this person. Fowler shows up. They kind of get in a bit of a fight. And then finally, the killer shows up and kills and mutilates her in the same fashion, which makes Fowler the top suspect, and there's an APB put out on her. So someone's gonna get information, and then of course they get killed. Similar to how someone has information for someone else, they get killed before they can tell that person. Really nothing else left to talk about, unless I get into spoilers, but I will say this is definitely, of the 4 Forgotten Giallo sets through Vinegar Syndrome, this one definitely has the biggest spread from the worst of the set to the best. Now, I really liked The Killer Is Still Among Us. Sister of Ursula, I think I was fair on it. I don't remember quite how I felt about it. I know I didn't hate it. I don't hate this movie, but it's definitely not one that I enjoyed. It's not one that I was a fan of. I mean, at most, I guess I could say it, at least I saw it. It's not one I would enjoy watching again. I mean, it has decent music. Some of the acting is okay. It feels... It does feel like it's trying too hard to be more of like the growing erotic thriller. But it's also one of those where like the sleaze level is so high. I think because by this time interest in Giallo was so low and Giallo was pretty much dead at this point. Unless it was someone like Argento, who, I mean, he did Trauma shortly after this, which was fine. He did Opera shortly before this, which is really good. So they were still being made, and there were still some good ones, but I think public interest was just so low that they had to use the gimmick of either really high sleaze and sex or really high lurid blood and violence. And this one has both. And unfortunately, it does have a decent concept. I like the idea of a husband kind of sending his nymphomaniac wife out to meet these men, and then these men being killed. And I think if it had caused more of a rift, well, it causes a rift between the spouses, just not in a way that I think would have been more interesting. Although it does, well, I can't really say that. I'll save that for spoilers, but yeah, definitely not one of my favorite Gialli. Is it a contender for my bottom 10? Quite possibly, because I've actually been making a top 10 best and worst as I've been doing all these. And some of the higher up ones in my bottom 10, I really don't hate. So when one like this comes along, I can take off ones that I thought were decent or that I thought were passable, just lesser so than other ones. Like naked girl murdered in a park or death carries a cane. I can actually make a list of 10 actually bad ones. So yeah, not a fan of this one. It does feel more like the budding but not very good erotic thriller genre. Has enough little moments of classic Giallo. It's nice seeing Evelyn Stewart, but other than that, and other than the core concept itself, it's not a terribly interesting movie. It does feel kind of confusing at times, just what characters are thinking or what exactly is happening with them plot wise. Because like I said, I was trying to figure out how exactly the story with Fowler was mixed with the Black Angel, you know, killings, which they're all under the scissor murders, but I, I think rather poor writing didn't really blend it all that well together. So yeah, definitely one of my bottom jelly, but I'm gonna get to spoilers now. So after this APB is put out on Fowler, she decides to look up Evelyn Stewart. Oh, well, we find the secret that we find out, which we find out when the Agnes character put it in the paper and she goes to confront her. She says right there what it is that Fowler, when she was young, I think when she was 12, her mother killed and castrated her father. I don't remember if it says because he was abusive or she was crazy or both or what. But after the APB is put out, she looks up Evelyn Stewart, find out Evelyn Stewart is her biological mother. She was put up for adoption shortly. Well, she could have been 12 then. She must have been a lot younger. I don't remember exactly, or if they even say it. But yeah, I find out that not only is Evelyn Stewart her biological mother, and that she was put up for adoption, but when Evelyn Stewart remarried, she had Frank, which is Fowler's half-brother. Which at this point we also see that Frank who's really getting into Arabella going out and doing all this stuff, has even bought her lingerie and dressing up the way he's writing about her. It sends her out on one last outing, and Arabella seems to think that this is the time where she will catch the killer. So this is everything coming to a head. Now, it's setting it up like Frank is the killer because it shows him. One, we see that he can walk. He gets out of his wheelchair. He packs a bag. He puts his scissors in it. He's wearing gloves. I do like how this is being set up. Like, we're seeing him do this, but the camera's focused on the TV in the background when we see that Fowler's the top suspect. But then Evelyn Stewart tells Fowler, it's like, oh no, we have to protect Deborah, Arabella. We have to protect her. Every time Frank writes something, or every time she goes out and does it, something bad happens, and Frank writes about it. We got to go save her. And yeah, the writing isn't great. She says things like, it will lead to things. And when Fowler asks her what, she's like, it'll lead to bad things, to murder. Just, it sounds cornier, but eventually Fowler has Evelyn Stewart stop at this diner so she could get a coffee, but also call the case-appointed lieutenant because she seems to think that Stewart's the killer. Well, she either thinks it's her or Frank. It doesn't say who exactly she's thinking. But they know where Deborah. They know where Arabella's going, which I think they call Funky Boys Street. It's another strip in this rundown building with these male prostitutes. Arabella finds one. She's getting railed up against a tree, which Frank watches. And she doesn't know, she knows the killer's following her. But she doesn't know that it's Frank. So then Frank pops out. She thought he was actually paralyzed. Oh, and Evelyn Stewart leaves Fowler at the diner. We hear her being like, just babbling a delusional stuff, I guess, to make her look equally as suspect as Frank. And then finally, who will the real killer be? So this is when Frank admits that I faked being in a wheelchair, which we do see earlier in the film. After they left their wedding, she was giving him roadhead. He crashed. This is supposedly what put him in a wheelchair. He says he had writer's block, so he thought if he pretended to be paralyzed and then write a book, with each succeeding bestseller, his legs would get better. I guess he was right about that as well. I don't know. Something weird. And then that's when he admits that, he only married her for sex because he's very attracted to her. She's a nymphomaniac. So he goes to rape her as well, but she's a nympho, so she takes it. He even starts taking dirt and throwing it on her, which is weird. So that's when Evelyn Stewart comes up, stabs him with the scissors, but then when he falls over, she sees that it's Frank, who she didn't know it was him. So she's still messed up from what she did in the past. And then that's the last we see of Evelyn Stewart. We then jump 6 months later, where Arabella is being picked up by Fowler. Frank is dead. It doesn't say where Evelyn Stewart is. I guess she's been locked away or whatever. And, they have a talk about how Arabella still wants to live in the same house. She loved Frank. They were happy. Black Angel has been released posthumously. And now, I don't know if this was real, because it ends with her picking up a copy of Black Angel, and we see the cover. And then it repeats the first scene, when she shows up to that rundown sex house, seeing the same guy with the domino mask, kissing him, and then as she goes down, freeze frame and credits. I don't know if that's showing that it's the beginning of the book Black Angel, she's reading it and we're seeing that he wrote everything that happened, or if she's just continuing her life as a nympho. Nor do I really care. I don't think this movie was explained very well. Maybe I wasn't invested enough to really follow it as well as others. It could be a mixture of both, but yeah, I was not the biggest fan of this film. It's not the worst one. Actually, I take back what I said earlier about it having the biggest spread between worst and best of the set. Volume 1 still has Police Are Blundering in the Dark, which is the worst one of any of these Forgotten Giallo sets. That's the worst in just the sense that it's just a terrible piece of crap movie. It's one of the worst, but in a totally different category. Just, I didn't think there was anything to this movie other than its sleaze factor. I think that's really all it had to offer. Had a couple neat ideas, had good kills, it had the lurid violence that if it were a better movie, it would have been cool. I mean, I liked the kills. I liked, you know, how far it went with the violence and everything. The overall concept of, you know, writer's block husband, nympho wife, they kind of mix that together. But overall, it's not a terribly interesting or well-written movie. And I think its real appeal is the sleaze factor. Even so now, I'm pretty sure that was the case back when it first was made. It came out, it had to have that kind of stamp to kind of generate interest. And I think nowadays, I think that since that was what they had to do back then, it's really all that's noticeable about it now. I'm sure people will disagree. I'm sure people who are more into the trashier, sleazier films, like not just Giallo, but films in general, might really like this film. And if they do, I mean, like I said earlier, I like Giallo or films that can be sleazy, New York Ripper, but I feel like this is all it has. Same with Play Motel, which is still far sleazier than this, but that's all it has. This is a better movie than Play Motel, but it's certainly a contender for my bottom 10, just for least favorite. I wouldn't say it's one of the worst made. I would say on a technical level, it's still competently made. It's a decent looking movie. Has decent music. The acting isn't terrible across the board. Oh, and yes, the voice on the phone was like, "Is this Fowler?" I could tell as soon as here, I was like, that's Evelyn Stewart. We've seen her play characters like that before. I know it's her. And she does have some funny lines when she gets to that Funky Boys area at the end. Because as she's driving by the male prostitutes, there's one guy that's like, "I got 12 inches of heaven for you." And she just keeps driving. She says something like, "Do you know what could happen to that 12 inches you love so much?" I guess implying that she's the killer, which she is. So yeah, Arabella, Black Angel, definitely not one I enjoyed very much, but I'm sure there's people who did, and to each their own, but not really my kind of Giallo. So with that, I am now done with Vinegar Syndrome's Forgotten Jelly Volume 4. I would say my favorite of the three was certainly The Killer Is Still Among Us. I did enjoy that one the most. We'll see if there is a Volume 5. And so now I can go back to the ones I got from Trash Palace. I still have, I think, 5 left. I think the next one will be The Killer Reserve 9 Seats. So stay tuned for this or whichever one I decide to do. And I'm still going to have a review for the Giallo tribute Amer, which I have watched. I may watch again because I feel like I have to. But I'm going to try to get a review for this out this weekend. We're supposed to have a huge snowstorm up here this weekend. So I don't think I'll be doing anything. So hopefully I'll be feeling better and I'll get more videos up for you guys. But anyway, stay tuned for wherever those are. I hope you enjoyed the reviews for Forgotten Jelly Volume 4. And thank you for watching.